Well, good evening, everybody. Happy Thursday. This is the May 2nd episode of Dr. Pitt's Tips Live. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I hope that you have had a great week since the last time we chatted. For those of you that may be tuning in for the first time, I'll tell you the same thing every week. I do this because so many people won't go to therapy. So my social media manager said, well, Dr. Pitts, people won't come to therapy, so why don't you bring the information to them? And that's exactly what we started doing several months ago, bringing the information to you. But just for the sake of formality and legality, please, please, please know that whether you are tuning into my lives or looking at the information that's available on my social media platforms, my website, the reels, recordings, or what have you, whatever it is you may be tuning into, the information that I share week in and week out through those vehicles is not intended and does not amount to the advice that you should apply to yourself without first consulting a behavioral, mental health, or relationship practitioner. I am considered an expert in my field. I am a licensed couple, marriage, and family therapist. I am an international life coach, but I'm not your therapist. I'm not your life coach. So please, please, please make sure that the information that you are taking away from these lives and any other means that you obtain information from me, my team, or anybody else on social media, let me just go ahead and put that out there. Please make sure that you are running the information past your own practitioner so you are getting the best information for you. Therapy, life coaching, advice is not cookie cutter. It's not necessarily applicable to every single solitary person. So you have to make sure that the information that you are receiving is particular to your situation and can be used by you to improve the quality of your life or your experience or whatever it is that you are going through. So again, you want to make sure that you obtain the relevant information that is applicable to you and before you take, refrain from, or any action based on the information that you hear from me or, truth be told, anybody else on social media. If you have any questions at all about a medical matter, you should, common sense, use the information that you have available to contact your doctor or a professional healthcare provider without delay. If you think that you're experiencing a medical or mental health condition or emergency, please, please, please seek immediate medical or mental health attention from a doctor or other professional healthcare provider. You can do that, call 911, or for mental health, you can call 988. But the bottom line here is that this is information, but you need to run it past your practitioner or an emergency personnel in order to make sure that you're getting the appropriate information that is relevant, specific to your situation. So what I want to talk to you about tonight is a topic that I'm extremely passionate about, but I promise I'm going to regulate my emotions tonight. I'm going to behave myself, but I'm going to give you this information. And I want you to feel comfortable enough, if you so choose, you can send questions to me via chat. You always have the option of submitting your questions to me privately, and I will keep your name confidential. You can email me, you can inbox me. You can reach me through any of the social media means to have your questions addressed live during these sessions every Thursday. So tonight we're talking about physical abuse. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I have been physically abused at one point in time in my life's journey. And as you can imagine, as a therapist, I have encountered countless cases over the years of doing this work of individuals that have been physically abused, whether when I was still working with kids and adolescents, when I only work with adults now, so people 18 years of age and up. And the cases that I've encountered over the years are heartbreaking. And it, it just cuts you. It cuts you to the core of your soul. And in actuality, the reason why I don't work with children anymore is because I am a trauma informed therapist, meaning that all of my formal education and training was rooted in a trauma focused curricula. So trauma is one of my areas of expertise. In that, though, seeing so many cases at the beginning of my clinical career, I used to work inpatient drug and alcohol, used to work in corrections for adjudicated youth ages 13 to 19 and a half, and lived in a community where there was a lot of abuse, neglect, and maltreatment going on. And it breaks your heart. And I just, I just couldn't do it anymore. After having far too many cases of abuse, neglect, and maltreatment, and just seeing the horrific things in various forms of abuse that the children that were on my caseload were experiencing, I said, you know what? I just can't do it anymore. So I do not work with children anymore for that reason, and I won't work with children anymore for that reason unless God instruct me to do so. So when you look at this comparison between physical punishment and physical abuse, I want to clarify, because so many of us, regardless of race or ethnicity or socioeconomic status, so many of us grew up under the overarching umbrella, if you will, of biblical term of spare the rod and spoil the child. And I remember when I was in grad school, one of my professors for one of my classes, who actually also was an ordained elder in the church, she conveyed to us during class that spare the rod, spoil the child does not mean you get to abuse your children. You don't get to beat the brakes off your kid and injure them. That's the physical abuse part. The physical punishment part is where you use corporal punishment. You use spanking. I'm be totally honest with you. I don't think the word spanking exists in black households, but that's just my perspective. And I'm dead serious. I'm trying to think in my lifetime, have I ever heard a black person that I know talk about spanking their kids? No. They talk about, I'm gonna bust your A, I'm gonna beat your A, I'm gonna F you up, I'm gonna beat your you know the language. Don't act like I'm the only one that's heard it, because I know that I am not the only one that has heard that type of language. But using corporal punishment as a means of discipline also comes with a lot of other problems, because remember, as parents or as primary caregivers, we're the first role model that the children that we're responsible for see. So what I've seen over the years is, kids that are aggressive, kids that grow up in homes and in environments where corporal punishment, the hitting, the spanking, or any other type of aggressive form of discipline is used upon them, and then the kid is aggressive. The kid is at school fighting as early as pre-K or as early as kindergarten, and folks are shocked that little Johnny, little Hakeem, little Ashley, little Sarah, little Donna got kicked out of kindergarten or got kicked out of pre-K for fighting. Well, who taught them? Who taught them how to use physical aggression to solve their problems or to get somebody to do what they want them to do? They learned it. They learned it in the home. They learned it in the community. So there's a thin line between physical punishment and physical abuse. Physical abuse is when the results of your actions injure your child. And yes, that includes welts. When you are over in the realm of physical abuse, you are using tangible things, weapons, if you will, to discipline your child to the degree that the child sustains injury. Now, as someone who was physically disciplined growing up, and the belt that my mother used to physically discipline me still lays on her refrigerator without the buckle, I mean, Think about that. How many of you have busted your kid's A, have beat your kid, have effed your kid up, and without meaning to, ladies, you scratched them with your fingernails without meaning to, or you grabbed your kid so hard when you were beating them that you left your handprint on their body, or they had welts, or were otherwise bruised, or had evidence that physical discipline was used on them. But now you're over into breaking the law. Now you have officially abused your child. Houston, we have a problem. We have a problem because, and I know there's plenty of people that will push back. I don't care. I'm okay having the hard conversations. I'm okay expressing my thoughts and feelings about certain things, even when my position on it may not be popular. So this is what I have to say about corporal punishment that falls over into the lane of physical abuse, particularly where African American and people of African descent are concerned. I believe that it's the residual effects of slavery. That's my opinion. You don't have to agree with me. I'm okay with you not agreeing with me, but I really truly believe that the acts of aggression that are so prevalent in our homes and in our communities and in society at large, for us as a people, I believe that it's the residual effects of slavery. Keep the body strong and the mind weak. But does physical discipline really keep the body strong? I don't know. That's open for debate. But what I do know is that it breaks down the mind. That's what it was intended to do during slavery. Don't think for a moment that the psychological damage that is done when corporal punishment is used, don't think for a moment that it does not break down the psychological well-being of the child. Now, this will make sense to you all. There are some children out here that the first time that physical discipline is used against them, they get the memo and be like, ooh, won't do that anymore. But then you have the Laurens of the world. The Laurens of the world are those children that are the or else children. Get your butt in here or else. I'm going to take or else 4,000, Alex. I was the or else kid. I was my parents' and my grandparents' consequence kid. Part of my rebellion, though, was because there were so many other things that were going on in my life that I did not feel that I had control over, that if I made it up in my mind, and oh, by the way, I'm a Scorpio. If I made it up in my mind that I was going to do it, I had already counted the cost. I had already made up in my mind that that butt whooping that I was clearly going to get was well worth it. So in the grand scheme of things, there came a point in time in my life when corporal punishment ceased to be used to discipline me. What about you? Are you still beating the brakes off of your kids and teeter-tottering on physical abuse because you're determined that they're going to cry? You're determined that they're going to do what you want them to do? You're determined that it's your house and you say the rules, and if they're going to live here, they're going to do what you say, when you say it, and how you say it? And they're like, The means of discipline that you're using may be contributing to the child's rebellion. Or could it be that the child is extremely strong-willed because they take after their mama, their daddy, and everybody else? So, in other words, you're trying to beat your child into submission, teeter-tottering on abuse. And if you're honest, I mean, for real honest, your child act just like you. I don't see that my sister is on here tonight, but I'm going to go ahead and throw her under the bus because she know I love her. But my niece drives my sister batty. But she act just like her mom and her crazy behind daddy. Yeah, daddy, I called you crazy. You know I love you, but you're still badass crazy. She act just like her crazy mom and her crazy dad. So what you going, what? But she, and I will say, the corporal punishment is not used on her anymore. It's not used on her anymore because it doesn't work. She ain't worried about no spanking. She ain't worried about no beating. She ain't worried about getting socked. You know what she's worried about? Them near good video games. She's worried about them electronics. She's worried about that fly hairdo that she gets every couple of weeks or so. She's worried about coming to Texas to stay with Nona for the summer. That's where you get them, folks. You get them in those areas that matter most to them because eventually, busting them up is only going to do more harm than good. So why even go there in the first place? You can discipline your child and not abuse. How common is physical abuse? Because some of y'all ain't hearing me. Some of y'all, Dr. Pitt's talking crazy, this, that, and third, yakety, smackety, this, that. Okay, cool. Keep doing what you're doing. We live in communities today that's full of mandated reporters. Technically, all of us are mandated reporters. Because if you know that a child is being abused, neglected, or mistreated, and you don't report it, even if it is on a family member, you're culpable. That blood, that psychological damage that child is being subjected to, that's on your hands. Because you didn't protect them, and you were in a position to do it. My family members, my friends, my colleagues, people who are intimately connected to me, and even my clients, because I stress that to them too. Hello, excuse me, Houston. Dr. Pitts is a mandated reporter. I will tell. And let me just tell you, I'm not just telling because it's my job and responsibility to tell. I'm telling because I take issue with folk that decided to have kids and then abuse them. I have a serious problem with that. So even before I was a mandated reporter, I was going to tell. And for the snitches, what y'all say, snitches get stitches, I can fight. So I don't know what to tell you. I'm telling. You abuse your kid on my watch, I am telling. And I'm that person, when you call Child Protective Services and they say, would you like to remain anonymous? No, you can tell them it was me. Because you shouldn't be abusing your children. They didn't ask to be here. You raised them. Why are they acting crazy? Why are they disrespectful? Why are they disobedient? Why are they not following the rules in the household? Who did they learn that from? Did you spoil them rotten and now you can't control them? Did you let other people spoil them rotten and now you can't control them? They didn't come out the womb like that. Things have gone on in the environment that have created this behavior. And oh, by the way, because there's such a stigma in the black and brown community, don't nobody want to go to therapy because you don't want nobody all up in your business, but your child acting like a parkade, you can't control them. Sometimes the school can't control them. The community can't control them, and the cops are killing them. So what we gonna do? We gonna have appropriate conversations with them to get them on track so the cops don't have to talk to them or kill them? Or are you okay being in the Child Protective Service system? Because let me just tell you, as someone who's a mandated reporter, as someone who's considered an expert witness for family court, once you get into the system, it's hard as heck to get out the system. So you might want to be proactive in doing some things a little different so that doesn't have to be on your parenting resume. I'm just saying. Just, again, this is just information. Don't get mad at me. I'm just a messenger. But let me share some stats with you according to the National Children's Alliance. This may shock the boo-boo out of you. It didn't shock me because I've been doing this work for a long time. More than 600,000 children, 600,000, more than 600,000 children are abused in the U.S. each year. 600,000. Do you all realize that my hometown of Salem, New Jersey, my entire town has a total population of under 6,000. Multiply my hometown times, what's that, 100? 1,000? Math wasn't my strong suit. My baby daddy tutored me in math. Whatever the math is, you get the gist of what I'm saying. 600,000 is a lot of babies, a lot of children being abused each year. And they're unique incidents too. They were victims of abuse and neglect. Now, right now, the national stats are from 2021. Pandemic threw everything off. So it is believed that there's a lot of cases that are underreported because so much craziness went on during the pandemic that here we are 2024, we're still trying to recoup. Child Protective Services, child welfare authorities, and let me just say they're overworked and underpaid. But they have been responsible nationwide for ensuring the safety of more than 7 million kids. 7 million children. 7 million. Thank you, babe. My husband gave me the math, 100 times 6,000. 7 million children nationwide had to be removed from their homes and taken into Child Protective Service custody. 7 million. I'm going to say that again. 7 million. I want you to wrap your head around that. 7 million kids. 3 million children received an investigation or alternative response from Child Protective Service agencies. Thank goodness that's a decrease over previous years, but that number is still way too high. An estimated 1.8 million children had to receive prevention services. You letting these numbers marinate? So let's talk about how the abuse is impacting your sons, your daughters, your nieces, your nephews, your godchildren, your BFF's kids, your next door neighbor's kids, the kids that you're teaching at Sunday school, the kids that you're coaching. Statistics show us that the youngest children are the most vulnerable. Meaning that, and I think this is disgraceful, children in the first year of their life are 15% of all victims. And more than a quarter, 28% of children are maltreatment victims. And they're no more than 2 years old. What can an infant, a toddler, possibly do? What? That you lose your mind and abuse, neglect, and mistreat a baby, a toddler. They're not talking back. They're not breaking curfew. And those, don't get it twisted. Don't even put words into my mouth and say that those are reasons to breach your kids and abuse them. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the innocence and purity of a baby and a toddler is different than a sass-mouth adolescent that's pushing your buttons. And you still shouldn't abuse them. You definitely still shouldn't abuse them. But let's keep it real. Adolescents, kids can take you there. They have your code. You know what, mommy? Your code It's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ugh. They can pound on your code like a sledgehammer. But abuse? I want to blow your mind. I wasn't surprised by this statistic. And maybe I'm not surprised by this statistic because I've been black my whole life. Breaking down the child abuse demographics. I want you to guess. I want you to get it. I want you to get an idea in your mind of the group of people that experience the most abuse, neglect, or maltreatment. Well, girls have a victimization rate of 8.7 per 1,000 girls in the U.S. population. It's higher than boys. The rate for boys is 7.5 per 1,000 boys. American Indian or Alaskan Native children have the highest rate of victimization at 15.2 per 1,000 children. The second highest is African American children at a rate of 13.1 per 1,000 children. There's a bunch of reasons, a bunch of reasons why the prison system in this country is full of black men, women, boys, and girls. However, I have often said in those cases where incarceration was legitimate, meaning that somebody was not wrongfully accused, someone was not railroaded, someone was not set up, someone was not inappropriately handled by the police, but the person actually committed the crime. How many of those individuals were abused? And part of the issues that they have in regulating their emotions is because they were physically abused growing up. And all of the problems that come as a result of that physical abuse were not properly addressed, meaning that the individual didn't learn how to regulate their emotions, they didn't learn self-control and self-discipline, and they have a short fuse and they flick off and ended up catching a murder charge or a manslaughter charge or a vehicular homicide charge or a DUI because they're self-medicating because of the abuse. And the list goes on and on and on. As if you haven't gathered yet that child abuse is deadly, nationally, there's an estimated 1,820 children who died from abuse and neglect in the United States as of the 2021 data. I'm guessing that they'll catch up, that the various government officials will catch up on this data, and by next year hopefully we'll have more current. But I mean, regardless, it's still, we're only 3 years out from 2021. 1,820 children dead because parents, caregivers couldn't control their emotions, and they killed a child that they were responsible for protecting. Here's where the stats flip. Boys have a higher fatality rate at 3.01 per 100,000 compared to girls at 2.15. Heartbreak Central. And along with that heartbreak, African American child fatalities are 5.6 per 100,000, which is 2.9 times greater than that of white children and 3.9 times greater than Hispanic children. In layman's terms, caregivers are killing black children at alarming rates. Alarming rates. What the research shows us is that the majority of offenders are parents to the victim. Guess what that percentage is? 77%. 77%. That's a lot of parents that had children that didn't ask to be on this earth, that are being abused. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Am I talking to you? Are you a part of that 77%? Were you a part of that 77% if your children are now grown? Are you one of those individuals whose relationship with your child is awful? Is that you? Something else that I want to bring to your attention, because I hear this in therapy too. Child-on-child abuse is common. 2022 statistics show that 21% of people alleged to have abused a child were themselves children in cases where we knew the age of the alleged abuser. Around 14% of the total were teenagers. In other words, kids are being abused, and then they're abusing other children. We would put it in simple terms. They're bullies. They're bullies. They can't beat the adult that's abusing them, so they take out their rage, they take out their pain, they take out their woundedness, they take it out on other vulnerable children, and the cycle perpetuates. The cycle perpetuates. For those of you that were bullied when you were growing up, was your bully the same race as you? Was your bully the same gender as you? I was abused by both boys and girls growing up. And with the exception of one incident where a Caucasian boy was bullying me, all of the bullies who bullied me were black girls. And as I reflect upon each of those black girls who bullied me, I didn't know at the time, but in adulthood I learned that each of them was from horrific homes. They had atrocious home lives. They were being abused and neglected and mistreated and subjected to all types of craziness. So they directed their pain, their rage, their vulnerability, their hostility. They took it out on me. I was, in essence, so it appeared, the weaker vessel. I was, based upon appearances, I was the lame duck. In current language, I was the mark. I was the one that was the easiest to dominate, so they thought. But the root of it stemmed from all of the abuse, the neglect, and maltreatment that they were being subjected to in their homes. We need to have these conversations. There needs to be education within our homes, within our communities, within our schools, within our culture regarding abuse prevention. It's paramount. It's paramount to improving the quality of life for our children. It's paramount for improving the mental health of us as a people, but also humanity, period. Because, I mean, you heard the statistics. Children of all ethnic groups, of all socioeconomic classes, of all ages are being abused, neglected, and mistreated. So you're like, well, Dr. Pitts, how did we get here? How does all of this happen? Well, there's a root. And real quick, I forgot to mention to you that nearly 2/3 of the child abuse cases that are handled in this country involve child sexual abuse. 247,543 cases involving sexual allegations in 2022. Around 58% of all cases kids. And the concern is that the statistics are much higher than what federal statistics show. Folks, we have to pay attention. We can't just sit by idly and allow this to continue. When you think about where this is happening, it's happening in your home, it's happening in your community, it's happening in your schools, it's happening in your locker rooms, it's happening all around you. That statistic that I shared with you, that 77% of abusers being parents, in 2021, the reports showed that 452,313 perpetrators abused or neglected their children. I don't know how. I mean, I do know, but I don't. I don't know how someone can sleep at night knowing that a child in their family or amongst their friends or in their community or in their classroom or on their team is being abused and not report. Choosing to not be involved in this type of situation is just beyond insane to me. And for those of you that were abused, neglected, or mistreated yourself when you were growing up, and you have knowledge that someone that you know is being abused, neglected, or mistreated, and you don't report because you don't want to be involved, how do you sleep at night? How do you sleep at night? When we look at this statistic of 20 to 25% of child abuse cases every year also involving a child hurting another child, um, the advocacy part of my work shows me that with treatment, meaning when the child that has been abused receives appropriate mental health counseling and or therapy, 98% of these children never abuse another child again. But what on God's green earth is happening when it doesn't get treated? Somebody on Instagram, I'm going to read this stat. The comment is, I believe the African American churches need to be more trauma informed. Most are not. Instead, they are predisposed to their own biased belief. I agree. That ties into what I said about spare the rod spoiling the child. Does not mean that you get to abuse your child and hide behind the Bible. Are you kidding me? The Bible also says, provoke not your children to wrath. If you're beating me half to death and I'm internalizing all of that rage, all of that perceived hatred, and then I turn that on another vulnerable child, you talking about a vicious cycle that needs to be broken. My God. When we're looking at the depths of how children are being impacted to the degree that they end up abusing other children or abusing themselves, I shared on my podcast a couple of different times that, well, I think I shared it last week actually. When I was living overseas in Barbados, I was doing a portion of my dissertation research. I was dually enrolled at the University of the West Indies and at Drexel University. And I was working with 98 teenage girls from 4 different high schools. And a large percentage, forgive me, I don't remember the exact percentage, but a large percentage of those girls that were a part of my study were also involved in the DARE drug program because they were being abused in their home. I didn't know that. That wasn't part of my screening tool. But as fate would have it, because I do believe that it was fate, as fate would have it, a large percentage of my research pool, those girls were being abused, neglected, and maltreated. A number of them were cutters because they were also being subjected to sexual abuse. Cutting was such a problem in Barbados when I was residing there that I actually called the dean in my master's program to convey my concerns and said, how can we get them support? Because the behavioral and mental health practitioners at that time were not equipped to deal with the volume of abuse, neglect, and maltreatment that the children of Barbados were experiencing. I said, we have got to help them. That's why I'm working on getting my clinical license for Jamaica and Barbados, because the help is needed to address these issues. So what does it look like? How are your kids responding to being physically abused? Well, statistics also show us that Black children are disproportionately diagnosed with ADD and ADHD. And one of the things that I discussed when I was in my doctoral program with some of my colleagues was, do our children really have ADD and ADHD? Or do black children, particularly those that have been physically abused, do they have PTSD? Because one of the things that the data shows us as it relates to children that have been physically abused is that they do develop post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. There are a number of post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that can mimic the same behaviors that you would see in a child that has ADD or ADHD. And those symptoms include, but are not limited to, upsetting or frequent memories or nightmares about the abuse, efforts to avoid thoughts, feelings, or other reminders of abuse, i.e., they're not focused, problems falling or staying asleep, difficulty concentrating, angry outbursts. Here we go with the anger again. Because violent behavior is something that is learned. Let me say that again. Let me say that again for you spare the rod, spoil the child folks. Because violent behavior is something that is learned, it can also be unlearned. But if it persists, now we're conditioned to be aggressive. We're conditioned to be violent. We're conditioned to resolve our problems with ease. We're conditioned to resolve our problems with ease. We're conditioned to resolve our problems with guns and knives. We're conditioned to resolve our problems with extreme acts of aggression. I was talking to a colleague one time who was in the education profession, and she shared with me that in her school district that the major issues of aggressive behaviors that they have in her district wasn't the high school kids, it wasn't the middle school kids, it was the elementary school children, particularly the first and second graders. There was an incident, if my memory serves me correctly, where a second grade student had such a violent outburst and came at the teacher so aggressively that it slammed the teacher into a door, and the handle on the door slammed into the teacher's back, causing nerve damage. Do you know how much strength a second grade kid had to have to cause that much injury to an adult? Doesn't that make you nervous? Doesn't that? Don't you find that alarming? I was working with a client one time who, a male colleague of mine, was working with the child before I got the child. And the reason why the male colleague no longer wanted to work with the child is because the child was prone to outburst. And the child chased my colleague with a knife at 6. Our children's psychiatric hospitals and facilities in many states are full or near full because of children with mental health issues. And when you go into these facilities to work with these children and you review the history, many of these children have developed mental health issues because of the abuse, the neglect, and the maltreatment that they've experienced. I think one of the most horrific cases of abuse that I had ever heard about was a child that I was assigned to, and this child was also 6 years of age when they were assigned to my caseload. And the child had been subjected to so much abuse, neglect, and maltreatment that one of the diagnoses was dissociative identity disorder. For those of you who aren't aware, that's the new name for multiple personality disorder. This child had developed 7 distinct personalities. 7 at 6 years of age. I don't need to say anything else. I believe that's a mic drop. So, as we're preparing to close, Dr. Pitts, you have hosed us in the face tonight. What can we do to help? I'm so glad that you asked. Particularly for the caregivers. You have to seek help or take appropriate healthy measures to reduce your own stress. The reality of it is that when your fuse is already short, or you are dealing with your own unresolved childhood trauma and or adult trauma, it makes you predisposed. It makes you likely, in some instances, to abuse. If you don't know how to regulate your own emotions, if you lack self-control and self-discipline, my plea to you is please, please, please get the help that you need so that the children that you're responsible for are not being subjected to your verbal, emotional, or physical abuse. Learn to discipline without hitting. And the best time to start disciplining properly is when the child comes into the world. Because the moment you start hitting, you're teaching hitting. The moment you start using aggression, you're teaching aggression. Learn other means to discipline. You have to understand as a parent or caregiver how your reaction to the children is fueling certain behaviors. And here's the thing, they can't beat you, but trust and believe, all of that rage, all of that hostility, it can come out in the form of aggression. It can come out in low self-esteem. It can come out in positioning that child, setting that child up to have unhealthy relationships with others that abuse, neglect, or mistreat them. It's going to come out one way or the other. It doesn't just stay in there. It manifests itself in all kinds of ways. I'm telling you, when I screen clients, when I'm doing the assessments during intake and the back end of intake with some additional activities that I have them do, I can't think of a time that I ever had a client that presents with anger management issues that there's not a history of abuse. It's almost a default. You have to send a clear message to your children that violence is unacceptable. And if violence has been acceptable, then you're creating an atmosphere for more violence. You're setting the stage for your child to be violent. Teach your children nonviolent strategies to solve their problems. And part of that is going to be you learning nonviolent strategies to solve your problems. Treat your children and others with respect and kindness. Again, As the parent and primary caregiver and or primary caregiver, you're the role model. You're the role model for your children that's teaching them how to conduct themselves when they're upset or when they're frustrated. I've said to you before, the most simple definition of emotional regulation is increasing your tolerance for frustration. You have to increase your tolerance for frustration or make the necessary adjustments in your life to minimize your frustration. But taking your frustration out on your children is not the answer. Teach your children to understand that they deserve to have positive, healthy, nonviolent relationships with other people, including you. If anything that I said tonight resonates with you, please, please, please get help. If your children are grown, but you abused them when they were growing up, you got to fix that if you haven't already. You have to address the issues, your personal deficiencies that led you down that path in the first place. And you have to have those conversations with your children to try to make it right. Where can you go for help? If you need help, or if you have questions about child abuse or neglect, call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline. That's the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD. That's 1-800-422-4453. And then push 1 to talk to a counselor. The hotline counselors are available 365 days a year. And you can call this number if you live in the United States, Canada, Puerto Rico, Guam, or the U.S. Virgin Islands. The call is free and anonymous. Please, 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 please get help. And if you are not the abuser, but if you know of a child that is being abused, you have a responsibility to intervene. That's all I have for you tonight, folks. As always, I have a session in 3 minutes, so I have to go. But thank you. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Please make your friends, your family members, your colleagues, your community, tell everybody that you know about these lives. This information is so important. It's so incredibly important. And we need to spread the word. I'm speaking on a different topic every week. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so next week all I'm going to be talking about is various things to heighten your awareness about mental health. But until that time, have a wonderful and blessed weekend and the start of your week next week. And I'll see you back right here, same time, next Thursday. Have a good evening. I'm Dr. Lauren Pitts Bounds, and this is Dr. Pitts Tips Live. Have a good evening. Good night, everyone.